On my birthday, my millionaire son smiled and asked, "Mom, have you been enjoying the apartment I gave you?" I whispered, "Son, I live in the garage." My greedy daughter dropped her glass when she heard it. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." The candles on my birthday cake flickered in the dim light of what Blaine called my apartment. 65 candles, 65 years of life, and here I was, sitting in a converted garage that still smelled faintly of motor oil and old paint cans. "Make a wish." "Mom," Blaine said, his $1 million smile beaming across the makeshift dining table we'd set up between storage boxes. He looked so proud, so satisfied with himself. His designer suit probably cost more than I'd spent on groceries in the past 6 months. Celine sat beside him, her manicured nails tapping impatiently against her wineglass. At 38, my daughter had perfected the art of looking beautiful while radiating coldness. Her Botox prevented any real expression, but I could see the calculation in her eyes as she checked her phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "This is lovely, darling," I managed, forcing a smile. The concrete floor was cold beneath my feet, even through the thin rug I'd bought at a yard sale. "Thank you both for coming." Blaine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His wedding ring caught the light, a band that cost more than most people's cars. "Mom, you know how much I love you. I'm just so happy you're comfortable here. When I bought this place for you, I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." The words hit me like a physical blow. Everything I needed. I glanced around at the space that had become my world. The narrow cot pushed against the wall. The hot plate that served as my entire kitchen. The portable heater that barely worked when winter came. The single window that looked out onto the alley where garbage trucks rumbled by at 5 in the morning. "Blaine," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Son, I live in the garage." The wineglass slipped from Celine's fingers, shattering against the concrete floor. Red wine spread like blood across the gray surface. But it wasn't the broken glass that made my heart race. It was the look that flashed across her face. Not shock, not surprise. Recognition. She had known. She had known all along. Blaine's face went white. "What? No, Mom. This is the apartment. The garage apartment. It's separate from the main house, completely independent." I stood up slowly, my arthritic joints protesting. "Honey, look around. Really look." I gestured to the tools hanging on the wall that the previous owner had left behind, the oil stain on the floor that no amount of scrubbing could remove, the garage door that I'd had to cover with a tapestry to block out some of the cold. "The realtor," he said. Blaine's voice trailed off as his eyes took in details he'd apparently never noticed before. The exposed water heater in the corner, the lack of proper insulation, the single electrical outlet that powered my entire existence. 3 years, I said, my voice growing stronger. "I've been living here for 3 years, and you thought this was an apartment." Celine was picking up pieces of glass, but I caught her stealing glances between Blaine and me. There was something calculating in her expression, like she was trying to figure out how to control the situation. "Mom, I don't understand," Blaine said, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. "The listing said garage apartment. The realtor showed me photos of a converted space. You never said anything." That was the knife that twisted deepest. That I had never said anything. For 3 years, I'd been grateful. Grateful that my millionaire son cared enough to give me a roof over my head. Grateful that I wasn't homeless at 65. I'd convinced myself that this was enough. That I should be thankful for whatever scraps of love and shelter my children could spare. I didn't want to seem ungrateful, I admitted, sitting back down heavily. "You were so proud when you gave me the keys. You said you'd found me the perfect place. I thought this was what you believed I deserved." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear Celine's breathing, quick and shallow. I could see Blaine processing everything, his business mind trying to make sense of a situation that defied logic. "The heating bills," he said suddenly. "I've been paying heating bills for this address. Expensive ones." My heart clenched. "Those aren't for here, son." This space doesn't have central heating. I use that little space heater. I pointed to the pathetic device that barely kept one corner of the garage warm. The bills you're paying? Those are for the main house. The main house? Blaine's voice was faint. Celine finally spoke, her voice sharp and defensive. The main house is empty, Blaine. It's been empty since Mom moved in here. I thought you knew that, but I caught something else in her tone, something that made my blood run cold. She didn't think he knew. She had made sure he didn't know. Celine. Blaine turned to his sister, confusion and something darker creeping into his voice. You handle all the property management for me. You said you were making sure Mom was comfortable. You said you were checking on her. My daughter stood up, brushing off her designer dress. I have been checking on her. She seems perfectly fine. Don't you, Mom? The question hung in the air like a challenge. For 3 years, I'd played along with whatever story was being told. I'd smiled and nodded and pretended that living in a garage was perfectly acceptable. I'd convinced myself that my children's love came with conditions, and those conditions included accepting whatever they thought I was worth. But looking at Celine's face, that cold, calculating expression that I'd seen too many times over the years, I realized something that shattered what was left of my heart. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Celine had known exactly what she was doing. How long have you known? I asked her directly, my voice steadier than I felt. Known what? But her eyes darted away from mine. How long have you known that I was living in a garage while your brother thought he was paying for a proper apartment? The birthday candles had burned down to small pools of wax. The cake sat untouched. My grandson's photo smiled at me from my bedside table, a boy I barely knew because visits were always complicated according to his parents. Blaine was staring at his sister now, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Celine? But I already knew the answer. I could see it in the way she straightened her shoulders, preparing for battle. I could see it in the defiant tilt of her chin. She had always known, and somehow, that knowledge had been exactly what she wanted. The confrontation with Celine would have to wait. As my children left that night, Blaine shaken and confused, Celine coldly composed, I found myself alone with memories I'd tried so hard to bury. I sat on my narrow cot, pulling the thin blanket around my shoulders and let myself remember, really remember, without the protective filter I'd built over the years to make the pain bearable. It started when Blaine was 18 and Celine was 16. Harold had been dead for 2 years, and the life insurance money was nearly gone. I was working 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves during the day, and watching neighbors' children on weekends. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Blaine had gotten into Harvard, my brilliant boy, the first in our family to even dream of such a thing. The acceptance letter sat on our kitchen table for weeks while I tried to figure out how to make the impossible possible. Mom, I can take out loans, he'd said, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He knew what debt meant. He'd watched me struggle with it since his father died. No, I'd told him firmly, you're going to Harvard and you're going to graduate without owing anyone a penny. I sold the house, our beautiful family home where I'd brought both my children home from the hospital, where Harold and I had danced in the kitchen, where we'd measured Blaine and Celine's heights on the doorframe year after year. I sold it all. The realtor had called it a seller's market, but even then, after paying off the mortgage and Harold's medical bills, there was just enough for Blaine's tuition and a small apartment for Celine and me. It's temporary, I'd told my daughter as we packed our life into boxes. Just until Blaine graduates and gets established. Celine had been furious. At 16, she was old enough to understand what we were losing, but not old enough to understand why. She blamed me for making the sacrifice, as if there had been any other choice. All my friends live in real houses, she'd screamed during one of our fights in that cramped 2-bedroom apartment. I'm embarrassed to bring anyone here. I'd worked extra shifts to save money for her senior year activities. Prom dress, senior pictures, graduation party. I wanted her to have everything her friends had. even if it meant I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner most nights. When Blaine graduated, summa cum laude, with job offers from 3 major firms, I cried tears of pure joy. All the sacrifice had been worth it. My son was going to have the life I'd never been able to give him growing up. "Mom, let me help now," he'd said, standing in our tiny living room in his graduation cap and gown. "I'm going to make enough money to take care of both of you." And he had. Blaine's career had taken off like a rocket. Within 5 years, he was a partner at his firm. Within 10, he'd started his own company. By the time he was 35, he was worth more money than I could even comprehend. But somewhere along the way, Celine had inserted herself between us. It had been subtle at first. She'd moved to the same city as Blaine after college, taking a job in marketing that paid well but never seemed to satisfy her expensive tastes. She'd started handling family logistics for her busy brother. "Blaine's so overwhelmed with work," she'd tell me during our phone calls. "I help him manage everything so he doesn't have to worry about details." Those details, I now realized, had included me. When I'd started having trouble keeping up with rent on my apartment, Celine had been the one to suggest I might need something more suitable for a woman your age, Mom. When I'd mentioned that I was struggling to afford my medications, Celine had assured me she'd talk to Blaine about it. When I'd expressed how lonely I was, living by myself for the first time in my life, Celine had promised to find a solution that would work for everyone. The solution had been the garage. "Blaine found you the perfect place," Celine had announced, arriving at my old apartment with paperwork and a set of keys. "It's in a great neighborhood, and the best part is it's completely taken care of. No rent, no utilities to worry about. He's handling everything." I'd been so grateful, so touched that my successful son was thinking of me, making sure I was secure in my old age. When Celine had driven me to see the place, she'd walked me through quickly, pointing out the charming, exposed brick walls and the convenient location. "It's perfect for you, Mom," she'd said. "Simple, easy to maintain, and Blaine is so happy to be able to do this for you." I'd trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my daughter. But now, sitting in this garage at 65, I could see the pattern so clearly. Every time Blaine had tried to do more for me, and I was certain now that he had tried, Celine had been there to manage the situation, to filter his good intentions through her own agenda. The expensive heating bills he'd mentioned, the ones that went to the main house that sat empty. Had Celine told him I was living in the main house? Had she pocketed the money meant for my care? My phone buzzed. A text from Blaine. "Mom, I need to understand what happened. Can we talk tomorrow?" Before I could respond, another message came in, this one from Celine. "I hope you're happy. You've upset Blaine terribly with your dramatics." My dramatics. Living in a garage for 3 years was dramatics. I set the phone aside and walked to the small mirror I'd hung on the wall near my makeshift sink. The woman staring back at me looked older than 65. Her gray hair was thin and poorly cut. I'd been doing it myself to save money. Her clothes were clean but worn. Her face bore the lines of someone who'd spent years worrying about everyone except herself. But her eyes were finally awake. For 3 years, I'd told myself that this situation was temporary, that Blaine was busy building his empire and would eventually notice that something was wrong, that Celine was just looking out for her brother's interests, that I should be grateful for whatever shelter and support I received. I'd been living in a story that wasn't true, a story where my daughter was helping coordinate my care out of love, where my son was generously providing for me according to his understanding of my needs, where I was gracefully accepting the natural order of aging and dependence. The real story was uglier and more complicated. It was a story where one child's resentment had festered for decades, where manipulation had disguised itself as family management, where a mother's unconditional love had been met with calculated exploitation. But it was also a story where the truth had finally emerged. And truth, I was beginning to understand, was the first step toward something I hadn't felt in years. Power. My phone buzzed again. "Blaine, I'm coming over tomorrow morning. We need to fix this." I smiled for the first time in months. Yes, we certainly did need to fix this, but maybe not in the way he was imagining. Blaine arrived at 8 in the morning, looking like he hadn't slept. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his expensive clothes looked wrinkled, as if he'd thrown them on without his usual care. He stood in the doorway of my garage, really seeing it for the first time. "Jesus, Mom," he whispered, taking in the space heater, the hot plate, the narrow cot. How did I not know? I poured him coffee from the small pot I'd managed to make on my hot plate. It wasn't very good coffee, the cheap kind I could afford, but he drank it without complaint, sitting on the folding chair that served as my only furniture besides the cot. "You trusted Celine to handle things," I said simply. "And she did handle them, just not the way you thought." "But the bills. I've been paying for heating, for electricity, for property maintenance. Where was that money going?" I'd spent the night thinking about this exact question. "The main house, the one that's been sitting empty while I've been living out here. Celine told you I was living in the main house, didn't she?" Blaine nodded slowly. "She said you preferred having your own space, that you liked the independence. She said the garage apartment was just extra storage for you." My heart ached for him. My son, for all his business success, had been played as expertly as I had. "She's been managing your generosity, son, taking your good intentions and redirecting them. But why?" The pain in his voice was real. "Why would she do this?" Before I could answer, we heard a car door slam outside. Through the small window, I could see Celine's BMW parked behind Blaine's car. She'd come to do damage control. "Blaine, are you in there?" Her voice carried that false sweetness she used when she needed something. "I brought breakfast." She entered carrying an expensive bag from a high-end bakery, wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than I spent on food in 3 months. Her smile faltered when she saw us sitting together, serious and quiet. "Well, this looks intense," she said, forcing a laugh. "I thought we could all have a nice breakfast and clear up this silly misunderstanding." "Sit down, Celine," Blaine said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. She perched on the edge of my cot, carefully arranging her coat so it wouldn't touch the rough blanket. "Look, I know Mom got a little emotional last night, but you know how she can be. Sometimes she exaggerates things when she wants attention." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away, but Blaine's reaction was swift and sharp. "Exaggerates?" He gestured around the garage. "She's been living in a garage for 3 years, Celine. A garage, while I've been paying for her to live in a house." Celine's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. The main house needed work, extensive work. I didn't want to bother you with all the details, so I had Mom stay in the converted space while we handled the renovations. "What renovations?" Blaine demanded. "Plumbing, electrical, foundation issues. You know how these older properties can be." I watched my daughter lie with the ease of long practice, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't just about money or property management. This was about something much deeper. "Show him the house, Celine," I said quietly. Her head snapped toward me. "What?" "Show your brother the house he's been paying to maintain. Let him see these extensive renovations." "Mom, that's not necessary. Show me the house." Blaine stood up, and I could see the businessman in him emerging. The man who'd built an empire by seeing through people's lies and manipulations. 20 minutes later, we stood in front of the main house. It was a beautiful property in an upscale neighborhood, exactly the kind of place where a successful son would want his aging mother to live. Blaine had chosen well. He used his key to open the front door, and we stepped into a home that was not only perfectly maintained, but beautifully furnished. Hardwood floors gleamed. Fresh flowers sat on polished tables. The kitchen was modern and fully equipped. Upstairs, I could see through open doorways to comfortable bedrooms with quality furniture. "This is where you thought I was living," I said to Blaine, watching his face as he took in the reality. "But where?" His voice trailed off as he opened the refrigerator. It was fully stocked with expensive food, fresh vegetables, premium meats, imported cheeses. Enough food to feed a family for weeks. "Celine," he said, turning to face our daughter, "who lives here?" I already knew the answer. I'd suspected it for months, but now I was certain. "I do," Celine said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Sometimes, when I need space, when Marcus and I are having problems." Marcus, her husband of 15 years, who worked in finance and made a comfortable living, but nothing like Blaine's wealth. You've been living in the house I bought for Mom? Blaine's voice was deadly quiet. I've been maintaining it. Someone had to make sure it was properly cared for. Mom couldn't handle a place this size. So you decided she should live in the garage instead. It's a perfectly adequate space for one person, and she seemed fine with it. The lies were unraveling fast now, but Celine wasn't backing down. If anything, she was doubling down, as if her best defense was an aggressive offense. You want to know the truth? She said, her voice rising. Fine. Mom has been a burden for years, always needing something, always having some crisis. I've been protecting you from all of that, Blaine, handling her so you could focus on your business. Protecting me? Blaine looked stunned. Yes. Do you think it's been easy managing her constant complaints? Her doctor appointments? Her medication issues? Her loneliness? I've been dealing with all of it so you wouldn't have to. I stared at my daughter, finally seeing her clearly. You've been intercepting, I said, the pieces falling into place. When Blaine tried to call me directly, when he tried to visit, when he wanted to do more for me, you've been running interference. Celine's silence was answer enough. The Christmas present, Blaine said suddenly. Last year, I ordered you that expensive heating system. I told Celine to have it installed here. You never mentioned receiving it. Because I never received it. I looked around at the house that had been meant for me, with its perfect climate control and modern amenities. Where is it, Celine? Mom's place didn't need that level of heating, Celine said quickly. So I had it installed here instead, for when she visits. When she visits? Blaine's voice cracked. This is supposed to be her home. But I was thinking about all the other things that had never reached me. The care packages Blaine mentioned sending, the medical specialists he'd said he'd arranged appointments with, the grocery delivery service he'd thought he'd set up for me. All of it had been filtered through Celine. All of it had been redirected, minimized, or simply kept for herself. How long? I asked her. How long have you been stealing from both of us? I haven't stolen anything, she snapped. I've been managing family resources efficiently. Mom doesn't need much. And you have more money than you know what to do with, Blaine. I've been making sure nothing was wasted. The word hit me like a slap. Wasted. That's what she thought caring for her own mother would be. A waste of resources. Blaine walked to the window, staring out at the garden that someone had clearly been maintaining. Probably a service he'd been paying for, thinking his mother was enjoying the flowers. I need to understand something, he said without turning around. Did you ever tell Mom about the trust fund? The air went out of my lungs. What trust fund? Celine went white. The one I set up 3 years ago, Blaine continued, still facing the window. $50,000 a year for Mom's living expenses and health care. I asked you to explain it to her, to help her access the money. Celine, please tell me you told her about the trust fund. The silence stretched on until it became deafening. And in that silence, I finally understood the full scope of what my daughter had done to me. She hadn't just stolen my home. She hadn't just isolated me from my son. She'd stolen 3 years of financial security that Blaine had intended for me, leaving me to scrape by on my small Social Security check while she lived in luxury. Celine? Blaine's voice was barely controlled. Where is the money? Where is the money? Celine? Blaine's question hung in the air like a blade ready to fall. My daughter stood frozen in the middle of the beautiful house that should have been my home, her face cycling through emotions, defiance, fear, calculation, and finally, cornered rage. You don't understand the expenses involved in managing all of this, she said, gesturing wildly around the room. The house maintenance, the utilities, the property taxes, Mom's care coordination. Do you have any idea how much time I spend handling her medical appointments, her prescriptions, her— Stop! I cut her off, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Just stop lying. Celine whirled on me. You're calling me a liar? After everything I've done for this family? What medical appointments? I asked. I haven't seen a doctor in over a year because I couldn't afford the copays. What prescriptions? I've been splitting my pills in half to make them last longer. What care coordination, Celine? The color drained from her face, but she rallied quickly. You never told me you were having problems affording things. If you'd just communicated better, I did tell you. The memories came flooding back with crystal clarity. I called you last winter when I couldn't afford to fill my blood pressure medication. You said you'd talk to Blaine about it. I texted you when the space heater broke and I was freezing. You said you'd handle it. I asked for help with groceries during that week when the Social Security check was late. You said the family was going through a tight financial period. Blaine made a sound like he'd been punched. Tight financial period? Celine, I gave you access to an emergency fund specifically for Mom's needs. $25,000, refreshed every year. That money was being saved for real emergencies, Celine said desperately. Not every little complaint Mom had. Every little complaint? I stared at my daughter, seeing a stranger. Freezing in winter is a little complaint? Not being able to afford heart medication is a little complaint? You're being dramatic, Mom. You've always been dramatic when you want attention. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. But what broke my heart wasn't the words themselves. It was the realization that this was how she'd always seen me. As a burden. As an inconvenience, as someone whose needs were automatically suspect, whose suffering was performance. Blaine pulled out his phone and started making calls, first to his accountant, then to his lawyer. As he spoke in low, clipped tones about financial audits and trust fund management, Celine's bravado began to crumble. You can't do this to me, she hissed at me while Blaine was on the phone. I'm your daughter. Family doesn't destroy family over money. You're right, I said quietly. Family doesn't do that. But you stopped being family to me the day you decided I was worth less than the money meant to care for me. I kept you safe. I kept you housed. You're acting like I threw you on the street. You kept me in a garage, Celine. While you lived in my house, used my money, and told your brother I was fine. I paused, studying her face. But that's not even the worst part, is it? She went very still. The worst part is that you enjoyed it. You enjoyed having that power over me. You enjoyed knowing that every time Blaine asked about me, you got to control the story. You got to decide how much love and care I deserved. That's not true. But her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When I called you crying because I was lonely, did you tell Blaine? When I asked if he could visit, did you pass along the message? When I wondered why he seemed distant, did you explain that you were screening all our communication? Blaine finished his calls and turned back to us. His face was stone, but I could see the pain in his eyes. The trust fund has been depleted, he said. Every penny, along with the emergency fund and the medical expense account. That money was being used appropriately, Celine said, but her voice was shaking now. On what? Designer clothes? Cars? Vacations? Blaine's voice was getting louder. Mom's been living on $800 a month in Social Security while you've been spending $50,000 a year meant for her care. I have expenses too. I have a family, obligations. You have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes, and you want to begrudge me. Begrudge you, Blaine exploded. You stole from our mother. You let her live in poverty while you lived off money meant for her. She doesn't need much, Celine screamed back. Look at her. She's perfectly fine living simply. She doesn't need designer furniture or expensive food or fancy medical care. Some people are just low maintenance. The words hit me like physical blows. Low maintenance. As if my decades of sacrifice, my years of putting my children's needs before my own, had been evidence that I simply required less. As if my quiet acceptance of whatever scraps they offered was proof that I was naturally content with less love, less care, less dignity. Get out. My voice was so quiet they both stopped arguing and stared at me. Celine, get out of my house. Your house? She laughed, but it sounded hysterical. This isn't your house. This is Blaine's house. Everything here belongs to Blaine. Actually, Blaine said, his voice deadly calm, as of today, the deed will be transferred to Mom, along with full access to all the accounts that should have been hers all along. Celine's face went white. You can't do that. I have nowhere else to go. Marcus and I are separated. I don't have anywhere. You should have thought of that before you stole from the person who sacrificed everything for you. I watched my daughter process the reality of her situation. For the first time in years, she had no leverage, no way to manipulate the narrative. She was about to lose everything she'd taken from me, and she knew it. That's when she showed me who she really was. "Fine," she said, her voice turning vicious. "You want to know the truth? I'm glad I kept you away from Blaine. You would have been calling him constantly, demanding attention, making him feel guilty for having a successful life. You're needy and pathetic, and you drain everyone around you." The words were meant to destroy me, and maybe, 3 days ago, they would have. But sitting in that beautiful house, understanding finally that my son had tried to love me well, that my suffering had been manufactured by my own daughter's greed and cruelty, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. "You're right about one thing," I said, standing up. "I am needy. I need respect. I need honesty. I need to be treated like a human being who deserves basic dignity. And since you can't provide any of those things, you're right. We're done." Selene stared at me as if I'd become a stranger. In a way, I had. The woman who'd accepted crumbs and called them kindness was gone. In her place was someone who finally understood her worth. "I want you out of this house by the end of the week," I continued, "and I never want to see you again." "Mom, you don't mean that. I'm your daughter." "No," I said, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. "A daughter doesn't do what you've done. You're a stranger who shares my DNA." She looked to Blaine for support, but found none. Her brother was staring at her like he'd never seen her before either. "Blaine, you can't let her do this to me. I'm your sister." "And she's my mother," he said quietly. "The mother who sold her house to send me to college. The mother who worked 3 jobs to make sure we had everything we needed. The mother who deserved better from both of us." Celine's composure finally shattered completely. "This is all her fault," she screamed, pointing at me. "She made herself into a martyr, always sacrificing, always suffering. She made us feel guilty for having good lives. She did this to herself." The accusation hung in the air, and I realized it contained a grain of truth that made it even more painful. I had sacrificed everything for my children. I had made their happiness more important than my own well-being. I had taught them, through my actions, that my needs were less important than theirs. But that didn't excuse what Selene had done with that lesson. Instead of feeling grateful or protective, she'd felt entitled. She'd decided that because I'd always given more than I received, I should continue to expect less. "You're right," I said, surprising her. "I did teach you that my needs didn't matter, but you had a choice about what to do with that knowledge. You could have tried to give back. You could have made sure I was cared for in my old age the way I cared for you in your youth." I walked to the window, looking out at the garden I should have been tending for 3 years. "Instead, you decided that my willingness to sacrifice meant I deserved to keep sacrificing. Forever." When I turned back, Selene was crying. But they were angry tears, not remorseful ones. "I'll contest the deed transfer," she said. "I'll prove you're incompetent, that you need management. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." Blaine stepped forward, and for the first time since we'd entered the house, he looked dangerous. "If you try to hurt her again in any way, you'll find out exactly how much power having money actually gives someone. Don't test me, Selene." My daughter looked between us, seeing something that made her take a step back. Then she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "This isn't over," she said. But as I watched her leave, I realized that for me, it finally was. 2 weeks after Selene stormed out of what was now officially my house, I was sitting in the kitchen I'd only dreamed of using, sorting through boxes of my belongings that Blaine had moved from the garage. The contrast was surreal. Going from a hot plate and a mini fridge to a full kitchen with granite countertops and professional-grade appliances. But the biggest change wasn't in my living situation. It was in my relationship with my son. Blaine had taken a leave of absence from his company, something I'd never imagined him doing. He came by every day, sometimes just to check on me, sometimes to help with practical matters like updating my address with doctors and government agencies. We were learning how to be family again, without Selene's interference. "I keep thinking about all the times I should have visited," he said that morning, sitting across from me at the breakfast table. All the times I called Celine instead of calling you directly. You trusted your sister, I told him. That's not a character flaw, but I should have known something was wrong. The fact that you never asked for anything, never complained, never seemed to need help, that should have been a red flag. I understood his guilt, but I also understood something he didn't yet. Son, I trained you both to see me that way. For years, I made sure you knew that I could handle anything, that I didn't need help, that your success was more important than my comfort. He looked up from his coffee. What do you mean? I'd been thinking about this since the confrontation with Celine, how my own patterns had contributed to the situation I'd found myself in. When you were in college, working so hard to maintain your grades and build your future, what did I tell you when you called home worried about money? Blaine thought for a moment. You said you were fine, that I shouldn't worry about anything at home. And when Celine was struggling in her early career, spending more than she made, what did I do? You helped her out. You said it was just temporary. And when you got successful and wanted to help me, what message did I send? He was quiet for a long moment. That you didn't really need help. That you were proud of managing on your own. I nodded. I taught you both that loving me meant not burdening me with your problems, and not burdening you with mine. I thought I was being a good mother, teaching you independence and strength. But Celine took that and twisted it. She did. But the foundation was something I built. I reached across the table and took his hand. I'm not saying this to make you feel better about what happened. I'm saying it because I don't want to make the same mistakes going forward. We were interrupted by the doorbell. Through the front window, I could see a young woman with dark hair, nervously shifting a manila envelope from hand to hand. When I opened the door, she introduced herself as Jennifer Martinez, a private investigator. Mrs. Holloway, I'm working on a case that involves your daughter, Celine. May I come in? Blaine and I exchanged glances. We'd heard nothing from Celine since she'd left, though I'd been expecting some kind of retaliation. Jennifer sat in the living room, declining my offer of coffee. I've been hired by Marcus Chen, Celine's husband. He's filing for divorce and he believes she's been hiding assets. What does that have to do with us? Blaine asked. Jennifer opened her envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. In the course of investigating Mrs. Chen's finances, we discovered some irregularities that I think you should know about. She spread the papers across my coffee table. Bank statements, investment account summaries, property records. This is a savings account in your name, Mrs. Holloway, she said, pointing to one statement. Are you aware of it? I looked at the document. It showed an account with nearly $40,000 in it. I've never seen this before. It was opened 3 years ago, with Celine listed as the secondary account holder. Regular deposits have been made, but no withdrawals. Blaine leaned forward. What kind of deposits? Social Security overpayments, Medicare reimbursements, and what appears to be proceeds from a life insurance policy. My heart stopped. What life insurance policy? Jennifer pulled out another document. Your husband, Harold, had a small policy through his work. When he died, there was apparently some confusion about the beneficiary information. The insurance company has been trying to locate you for 3 years. I stared at the papers, not understanding. But Harold died 15 years ago. His life insurance paid out then. That's how I managed to keep us afloat for as long as I did. This was a separate policy, Jennifer explained. A retirement benefit that continued after his death. The company merged with another insurer, and in the transition, your case file was misplaced. When they finally located you, the address they had was outdated. So where did the money go? To this account, which was opened by someone claiming to be your legal representative. Jennifer's voice was careful, professional. The signature cards show Celine's name. Blaine was reading over the documents, his face growing darker by the minute. She's been collecting money meant for Mom for 3 years. It appears so. But here's the interesting part, Jennifer continued. She never touched it. Every deposit just sat there, earning interest. I was struggling to process this information. Why would she collect money but not use it? I think, Jennifer said gently, she was saving it for something specific. Based on some documents we found in her personal papers, it looks like she was planning to eventually claim that you were incompetent and needed a guardian. Having untouched money in an account she controlled would support a narrative that she was responsibly managing your affairs. The room spun around me. It was one thing to discover that Celine had been stealing from the accounts Blaine set up. It was another to learn that she'd been systematically intercepting money that was rightfully mine, building a case to have me declared incompetent. She was going to have me committed, I said, the pieces falling into place. It's possible, Jennifer admitted. She's been documenting what she calls concerning behaviors: isolation, poor decision-making, inability to manage finances independently. Blaine stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The garage. She kept Mom in the garage to create evidence that she couldn't live independently. And my reliance on her for everything, I added, feeling sick. Every time I called her for help with medical appointments or financial questions, she was documenting it as evidence that I was becoming dependent and confused. Jennifer nodded. Based on what Mr. Chen shared with me, there are also records of conversations with elder care attorneys and private care facilities. The manipulation was so much deeper than I'd realized. Celine hadn't just been stealing from me, she'd been systematically building a case to take away my freedom entirely. But she never followed through, Blaine said, turning back to us. No, Jennifer agreed, and based on the timeline, I think I know why. She pulled out another document. 3 months ago, Celine hired a private investigator to look into your finances, Mr. Holloway. I think she was trying to determine how much control she could gain over your assets if she became your mother's legal guardian. Blaine went very still. She was planning to go after my money, too. It's possible. In many states, if a parent is declared incompetent and their adult child becomes guardian, that guardian can make claims against other family members for ongoing support costs. I sank back into my chair, overwhelmed. My daughter hadn't just been stealing from me. She'd been planning to steal my independence, my autonomy, possibly even my relationship with my son. And she'd been building this plan for years, every interaction carefully calculated to support her eventual narrative. There's one more thing, Jennifer said. The reason Mr. Chen hired me originally. Celine has been transferring money into accounts under her maiden name, your maiden name, Mrs. Holloway. She's been building a financial profile that would support a claim that she's been acting as your financial representative all along. Identity theft, Blaine said grimly, among other things. Mr. Chen believes she was planning to claim significant assets as part of the divorce settlement, assets that she would say belonged to her as your caregiver and representative. I looked around the beautiful house that I was only now learning was truly mine, thinking about the garage where I'd spent 3 years believing I was being cared for. The scope of Celine's planning was breathtaking in its cruelty. What happens now? I asked. Well, Jennifer said, the $40,000 in that account belongs to you, and based on what we've uncovered, there may be criminal charges against Celine for financial elder abuse, identity theft, and fraud. Blaine sat back down beside me. Mom, this is your decision, but she needs to face consequences for what she did. I thought about the woman who'd raised me to believe that family loyalty meant accepting whatever treatment you received. I thought about the years I'd spent making excuses for Selena's coldness, telling myself that she was just practical, just protective of her brother. I thought about the life I could have had these past 3 years if I'd received the money that was rightfully mine, the medical care I'd gone without, the dignity I'd lost. And I thought about other elderly people who might not have a son like Blaine to advocate for them, other mothers who might be trapped in garages or worse, while their children systematically stripped away their resources and autonomy. I want to press charges, I said quietly. All of them. Jennifer nodded and made a note. There's one more thing you should know. Based on the documentation we found, you weren't her only target. My blood went cold. What do you mean? She's been corresponding with elder care attorneys about other elderly clients. I think she was planning to expand this kind of operation. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My daughter hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been planning to make a business out of exploiting vulnerable elderly people. But as shocking as this discovery was, it also gave me something I hadn't expected: purpose. For the first time in years, I had something important to do. something that mattered beyond my own survival. I was going to make sure Selene never had the chance to do to anyone else what she'd done to me. 6 months later, I stood in my garden, deadheading the roses that I'd finally had the chance to plant. The morning was crisp and clear, and the satisfaction of working with soil under my fingernails felt like a luxury I'd forgotten existed. The legal proceedings had been swift once the evidence was laid out. Selene pled guilty to financial elder abuse, identity theft, and fraud. She received 3 years in prison and full restitution, not just to me, but to the 2 other elderly clients she'd been targeting through her correspondence with unscrupulous care facilities. The judge had been particularly harsh in her sentencing remarks. This defendant didn't just steal money. She stole dignity, autonomy, and peace of mind from vulnerable people who trusted her. I'd attended the sentencing hearing, not out of vindictiveness, but because I needed to see the end of the story. Selene had looked older, smaller somehow, in her orange jumpsuit. She'd glanced at me once during the proceedings, and I'd seen something in her eyes that might have been regret. But it might also have been anger that she'd been caught. I'd nodded to her once. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. She was still my daughter in the biological sense, but the relationship I'd spent 65 years trying to nurture was truly over. The hardest part hadn't been the legal proceedings or even the public attention the case had received. It had been learning to live without the constant background anxiety that had defined my existence for so long. For years, I'd lived with the fear that I was one crisis away from homelessness, one medical emergency away from bankruptcy. Even when I was theoretically being cared for, I'd felt the precariousness of my situation in my bones. Now, with my own financial resources secured, and my relationship with Blaine rebuilt on honest ground, I was learning what it felt like to plan beyond the next month. I'd enrolled in a Master Gardener program at the local community college. I'd joined a book club at the library. I'd even started dating, something that felt both terrifying and wonderfully normal at 65. Robert was a widower I'd met in the gardening class, a retired teacher with gentle hands and a dry sense of humor. We moved slowly, having coffee after class, taking walks through botanical gardens, sharing stories about our children and grandchildren. Yes, grandchildren. That was perhaps the most unexpected gift of this entire ordeal. Blaine had been married for 8 years to a woman named Sarah, whom I'd met only briefly at their wedding. Another interaction that had been managed and minimized by Selene. Sarah was a pediatric nurse with warm brown eyes and an easy laugh. She was also 7 months pregnant with my first grandchild. "I feel terrible that we didn't include you more," Sarah had said during one of our getting-to-know-each-other dinners. "Selena always made it sound like you preferred your independence, that you found family gatherings overwhelming." I'd started to make excuses, my old habit of protecting everyone from discomfort, but Blaine had gently interrupted. "Selene lied about a lot of things," he'd said simply. "We're starting over." And we were. Blaine and Sarah included me in everything now. Doctor's appointments, baby shopping, nursery planning. I was learning about my son's life in ways I'd never been allowed to before. His struggles with work-life balance, his excitement about becoming a father, his regrets about the years we'd lost to Selena's manipulation. I keep thinking about all the conversations we should have had. He'd told me one afternoon as we assembled a crib in what would be the baby's room. All the times I should have called you directly instead of going through Selene. "We're having them now," I'd reminded him. And we were. The doorbell interrupted my gardening thoughts. I brushed the soil off my hands and went to answer it, expecting Robert with the Chinese takeout we'd planned for lunch. Instead, I found a young woman holding a baby carrier. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm Amanda Chen, Marcus's sister." My heart clenched. Marcus was Selene's ex-husband, and I'd heard through the legal proceedings that they had a young child together. "This is Emma," Amanda continued, adjusting the carrier so I could see the sleeping toddler inside. "She's your granddaughter." I stared at the little girl, seeing traces of Selene in her features, but also something softer, more innocent. Emma was maybe 18 months old, with dark curls and chubby cheeks. "Marcus wanted you to meet her," Amanda explained. "He said you have a right to know her, regardless of what happened with Selene." My throat was tight. "How is she?" Emma's doing well. Marcus has full custody now. He's a good father. Amanda paused. He also wanted me to give you this. She handed me an envelope with my name written in a careful, unfamiliar hand. May I hold her? I asked. Amanda smiled and carefully lifted Emma from the carrier. The little girl woke up as I took her, studying my face with solemn, dark eyes. Hello, sweetheart, I whispered. I'm your Grandma Janine. Emma considered this information seriously, then reached out to touch my face with one small hand. Later, after Amanda and Emma had left with promises of future visits, I sat in my living room reading Marcus's letter. Dear Mrs. Holloway, I want you to know that I had no idea what Selena was doing to you. If I had known, I would have intervened immediately. I'm writing to ask if you would consider being part of Emma's life. She deserves to know her grandmother, and you deserve to know her. Celine will have supervised visits once she's released, but I want Emma to understand that she has family members who will treat her with kindness and respect. I also want you to know that some of Celine's behavior toward you makes more sense now, in light of her treatment of Emma and me. She was controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive. I spent years making excuses for her behavior, telling myself she was just stressed or overwhelmed. Emma and I are in therapy together, learning healthier patterns. If you're willing, we'd love to have you be part of that healing process. Sincerely, Marcus. I folded the letter carefully, thinking about patterns and cycles, about how damage gets passed down through generations until someone decides to break the chain. Celine had inherited my tendency to sacrifice, but she'd twisted it into something self-serving. She'd learned to manipulate others' guilt and loyalty, to exploit the very qualities that should have made her a better person. But Emma didn't have to inherit any of that. Emma could grow up knowing that she was valued for who she was, not what she could provide. She could learn that love doesn't require sacrifice of dignity or autonomy. That evening, Blaine and Sarah came for dinner. Sarah was moving more slowly now, her pregnancy entering the final stage, but she insisted on helping me cook. I got some interesting news today, I told them as we prepared vegetables for a stir-fry. I have another grandchild. I told them about Amanda's visit, about Emma, about Marcus's letter. How do you feel about it? Sarah asked gently. I thought about the question while I chopped carrots. Hopeful, I said finally. That little girl deserves better than the legacy Celine would leave her. Maybe I can help with that. Blaine nodded. You're good at raising children who know how to love. I made mistakes with you and Celine, I said. I taught you both that my needs didn't matter. Celine used that lesson to justify cruelty. You used it to justify distance. Neither response was healthy. So what will you teach Emma? Sarah asked. I smiled, thinking about the little girl's serious eyes, her careful study of my face, that she's valuable exactly as she is, that the people who love her will show up for her consistently, that asking for help isn't weakness, and giving help isn't sacrifice, it's just love in action. After dinner, we sat on the back porch watching the sunset. Sarah had her feet up, one hand on her rounded belly. Blaine was reading work emails but putting his phone down every few minutes to engage in our conversation. I've been thinking about forgiveness, I said suddenly. They both looked at me. Not forgiving Celine, I clarified. I'm not there yet, and I may never be. But forgiving myself. For what? Blaine asked. For all the years I spent believing I was worth less. For teaching my children that love meant accepting whatever treatment you received. For not fighting harder when I knew something was wrong. Sarah reached over and took my hand. You survived. That's enough. But I knew it was more than that. I hadn't just survived. I'd finally learned to thrive. At 65, I was discovering what it felt like to live without fear, to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what others expected from me. The garden I'd planted was blooming now. Roses and lavender and herbs that I used in my cooking. The house felt like home, in a way it never had when I thought I was borrowing it. My bank account had enough money for both necessities and small luxuries. Books, good coffee, flowers for the table. But the real luxury was peace. The absence of that constant low-level anxiety that had hummed in the background of my life for so long. The knowledge that I was safe, valued, and free to make my own choices. As we said goodnight that evening, Blaine hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I should have said that more often." "You're saying it now," I replied. "That's what matters." After they left, I walked through my house, turning off lights and checking locks, the habits of security that I was still learning to trust. In my bedroom, I found the small framed photo that Blaine had given me, a picture of me holding him as a newborn, my face radiant with new mother joy. For years, I'd looked at photos like this and seen only the sacrifices to come, the long road of putting my children's needs before my own. Now, I saw something different. I saw a woman who was capable of fierce love, who had strength she didn't even know she possessed, who would survive whatever came next. I was that woman still, 65 years old, free for the first time in decades, with grandchildren to love and a garden to tend, and a future that belonged entirely to me. It had taken me a lifetime to learn that I was worth fighting for, but I'd learned it in time to matter. And that, I thought as I turned off the bedside lamp, was enough. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.